Hey everyone, good to see you. My guest today is Sam Newsome. Amazing composer and artist, and he's also an author. He's written two nonfiction books about the artistic process. I have them right here. One is called Life Lessons from the Horn, the other, Be Inspired, Stay Focused. He's got lots of music. Please check him out. He's extraordinary. If you're watching this, I would be so grateful if you liked and subscribed. It would really, really mean a lot to me. And it would be great to hear from you. So if you have anything to say, please don't hesitate. Hope you're well, and I'll see you on the other side. Bye. Micro practicing.
Yes.
Like, how do you manage your time?
Well, I guess the whole idea sort of really stems from, I guess when I first moved to New York and I had much less time to practice than I did when I was at Berkeley. As you know, when you're in college, like your whole existence oftentimes is about practicing, just trying to get better and preparing yourself for the move to New York. And so for me, I was pretty obsessive about it. So I would practice, 4 or 5 hours a day easily. It was nothing.
Macro practicing.
Yeah. But when I got to New York, just having to work a day job and just having a lot of time constraints, that was just not possible. And also living in an apartment where I had neighbors, versus being in a dorm. I had such limited time. So I had to sort of think about, okay, so how can I continue to improve without just totally letting my skill sets, fall off. And so I just realized that I just had to focus on just smaller things or fewer things, So I guess with the whole concept of micro practicing was, rather than going into it thinking, oh, with these grandiose objectives of I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this, it'd be like, well, maybe I'll just work on my tonguing for today or maybe for the week. And maybe if I only have 20, 30 minutes, I can only do that. And by focusing on that, it's like I would see results versus going into it saying, well, okay, I'm going to try to learn a tune. In 30 minutes, I'm going to try to learn a tune. I'm going to have like a 2/5 lick I want to try to take through the keys. I have a classical etude I want to work on, and I want to work on this, this, and this, rather than trying to fit like 8 or 9 things into 30 minutes and sort of only being able to do a few of them well. I figure, well, why not just do one thing well? And then sort of, I kind of see it as being sort of a link to sort of a bigger chain, so if I can just focus on developing each link, eventually the chain will be sort of the size that I want it.
Wow, that's beautiful. Wow. What are you micro practicing these days?
Interesting. I wish I could say I'm micro practicing a lot, but I guess more recently, if I had to think of a technical thing that I'm working on, it's probably just basic tonguing stuff, just because I've noticed whenever I'm in situations where I have to read and I'm just playing various parts, it's usually the tonguing part that's kind of slowing me down the most. So I just figure, well, if I can just sort of be on top of that when I am in this situation, it will be fewer technical hurdles. And so, and I guess that's what I do technically. And I think creatively, I usually have some type of tune that I'm working on, where I'm trying to integrate extended techniques, or maybe I have, one of these types of, inventions that I'm trying to come up with, and I'll, try to see if I can come up with some outcomes that, that I like. And I guess even with this, it's just like, rather than having like a whole array of things that I'm working on, I might specifically say, let me just see what I can come up with only using this. And then maybe one week I might, have the chimes and think, oh, well, what kind of ideas can I come up with just only using
Mm-hmm.
these times. So yeah, so it's just being very focused and very targeted, and just having a very limited scope.
That's so interesting. Do you find yourself with these days with more time?
Um, Interesting. I'm not sure if I have more time because as you get older, it's like your the time gets filled up very easily, and then when you sort of weigh all of the different entities, it's like I'm a full-time university professor, and then being a parent and husband, or if I should just say family man, family person, and then we are in a homeowner, then that's a whole other can of worms. And then,
Window
yeah,
leaks. Yeah, that's
the roof
nobody's
leaks,
coming to fix it.
ceiling.
Yeah.
And then also, I get called for a lot of, not, my performances are not overly abundant, but I do work. So I have to deal with, sometimes learning people's music or just trying to prepare. So, I'm always, there's always something that I'm preparing
Pulling you.
for there. Yeah. So there's a lot of uh, people, or just who want some of my time. So I don't really have a lot of time, but when I do, I try to work on things that I'm excited about, that I feel inspired to do. So it's kind of, it's, I find, as I was saying earlier, I just from the not having a lot of time, I I'm I force myself to be focused on just like a few things.
One thing, listening to you right away, you can tell like this guy's spent a lot of time on his sound. What kind of things do you work on to to develop your sound?
Um, I think what I work on is not actually anything different from what
Mm-hmm.
anybody else does. I mean, it's the typical long tones, overtones, practicing with the tuner, things like that. But I think if there is a difference, I think it just has to do with my commitment to the instrument. I mean, if you just looked at it in terms of hours clocked in, you know, just from the fact that I only play the soprano, you know, I'm putting in a lot more hours than the average saxophonist. And then that in itself is going to give me a certain awareness. And it's going to raise my standard, because, uh, you know, like the people will expect more from me, because if they're calling me only to play the soprano, it's like they're kind of expecting everything. It's like it's not going to be like, oh well, that doesn't work for that instrument, so well, let's pull out the flute or clarinet or the
Mm.
alto or tenor. Maybe that'll be a better fit or better range. So I'm expected to kind of do everything. I get called for things where I have to play in the altissimo register, and some things are written string low registers, and I'm expected to deal with. I can't say, well, that's not comfortable for the instrument. So I have to get over pretty much all sound and technical hurdles, so I can sort of be able to, uh, I think, deal with whatever comes my way. And so when I'm practicing sound, I mean, it's not that I'm doing anything different. It's just my focus is so much more heightened, and I let I let very few things slide. So it's like intonation anywhere is not tolerated. Like sometimes with the soprano, like playing in the low register, like the low B or low B flat, it can be a little bit on the sharp side. But if they're calling me to only play the soprano, like that's not an option. So I have to really work on making the low B flat as in tune as the middle B flat.
Yeah.
So it just my expectations are, I don't, I guess, higher, or are just it just I have to be less tolerant of deficiencies.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about this, but practicing in a way, practicing, I think you were talking about practicing the instrument so that um, you feel comfortable. You're talking about like playing in the low register
Yeah.
of the instrument so that your lines feel comfortable to sit on a low B or a low B flat. Um, whereas, yeah, myself included, like usually it's like, oh, if I'm playing low, it's starting the line.
Mm-hmm.
How did you think, like, I don't know, where'd you come up with that idea?
Um, I mean, it just came from, I guess, one, thinking about the possibilities of the instrument and how, you know, I don't know if I have a limited range, but it's like there's no sort of range where I can sort of look at as being, I don't know if you want to say throwaway range for lack of a better term. You know, it's like it all has to be sort of a sort of an accessible part, you know, where I can always feel I can play there, I can play melodies there,
Yeah.
I can improvise there and just have it be as comfortable in the extreme low as it is in the extreme high. You know, so I guess in order, as far as developing it, you know, just, you know, practicing lines down there or practicing patterns, sometimes practicing melodies, you know, to see how far, you know, to see, I guess you're sort of changing the octave so you're constantly having to go to the lower register whenever possible.
Right. When you said that, I thought of or when I read that, I thought of the Steve Lacy, and I was like, there's a guy I think, if I can think of somebody who also maybe thinks about that, like having lines go in the lower part of his register. Are you? I assume you're a fan of Steve Lacy.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I guess when I first started playing the soprano, I mean, he was certainly my biggest inspiration.
Was he in Boston when you were there?
No, he came after.
Oh, okay.
I had already been in New York,
Oh, okay.
and I had just started playing the soprano, I think, when he got the gig at NEC.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
I don't know if how long I had been playing it, but
Did you ever meet him or hang out?
I met him once, but I didn't really. I think I reached out to him once, but you know, it was a very different time. You know, it wasn't like social media hadn't really sort of become the center of our lives, and it was just, you know, it's like we wanted to reach people. Maybe you could either send a email, maybe, or leave a voicemail on their answering machine. You know, it was a little
That's
more.
funny.
It was a little more
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now it would be easier, I think, to
Yeah.
try to connect with them. So that's one of the regrets that I have, like that I didn't make even more of an effort just to try to connect musically, if nothing else, just to get a lesson and just sort of
To specifically him.
yeah,
Yeah.
just to sort of just sort of see what it's like, just to kind of being in his presence, sort of in a sort of a musically intimate setting.
When you first started playing, it was kind of Young Lions. It was Terrence Blanchard. That, like, how did it evolve into the music that you're exploring today?
Well, I guess it first came from an instrument change, and then from the instrument change came, sort of, you might say, the musical changes.
Mm.
So I guess as far as the instrument change, you know, I guess there was a period where I stopped playing with him where, I don't know, it may have been a year or two, maybe longer, where I really didn't have a lot going on. You know, I was, you know, because his gig was my main gig, you know, while I was in New York, and I hadn't really nurtured a lot of other relationships as far as just being a freelancer,
Mm.
you know, because that was my gig, I go on the road, come back and practice and do whatever I was doing, and then go back out again. So that was kind of, it's like a job, being, having a position,
Mm-hmm.
as the tenor and player in someone's group. But then after he left, after I stopped playing with him, I I didn't have like the big band gigs or the club date or the small sort of pass the hat gigs or whatever that people were doing. You kind of string them all together, and you have your students. There's like an array of things that musicians do to sort of make ends meet. Like everything I was doing was just sort of concentrated in this one area. So I didn't really have a lot going on. So it was kind of a struggle, just trying to, in some ways I was kind of starting over. I felt like, even career wise, at least just as far as getting income coming in. So there was a point at which I got called to do a gig where the person wanted a lot of soprano. And I was like, wow, this would be a great opportunity to get the instrument together. So I spent like a month or two, like really getting into it. And then I started to notice that, there was a certain sonic clarity that I was able to get to on the soprano almost immediately that I was not able to get to on the tenor. Because when I was playing the tenor, I was very frustrated with my sound. Like I was one of those saxophonists who was always changing reeds, always changing mouthpieces, ligatures, and then eventually it got to trying out horns, and then I just felt like it was just kind of downhill after that. So that sound was always a source of frustration for me. It was just a certain sonic clarity I felt like I couldn't get to. Maybe other people heard it differently. So it was almost immediate, with the soprano. But of course, I had the technical challenges of, being able to control it, endurance, intonation, and things like that. But just the core of it was almost there immediately. So
And I assumed you'd played a little soprano.
not a lot.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of a long story, but I got the sopranos like a graduation present when I graduated from Berkeley, and I didn't really use it much. To be honest, I actually ended up hawking it when I got to New York. I wasn't playing it. No one was, calling me for tenor gigs. For soprano gigs, and actually Antoine Roney needed a soprano. He was like, "Hey man, I'll get that soprano for you out of hop, if you let me use it." So he ended up getting it, and he used it for years. And then at one point when I was with Terrence, he was scoring a film, and I think for me anyway, it was going to pay a lot of money. He was like, "Yeah, man, I'm going to need you to play some soprano on this gig, on this film score." So that's when I had to basically wrestle it back from Antoine. But I got it back, and then I started working on it, and then it was sort of you know I don't want to say downhill, or maybe even uphill in a certain way after that.
When I was growing up, I'd be lucky if a teacher had, a false fingering,
Right.
or like a multi-phonic.
Yeah.
Were there models of musicians that you kind of look to for inspiration?
Not really. It was just more uh, exploring different books. You know, at the time I started to get into multi-phonics, I started teaching more, and so it was actually one of the first times in a long time that I actually had steady income, and I kind of made a conscious decision that I didn't want to work sort of as a freelance musician the way that I was before. Because even before I started teaching, I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was working a lot. I would sometimes do 2 or 3 gigs in a day. I might play a church gig, and then I'm playing like at the tap bar at the knitting factory, and then maybe go from there to Joe's pub.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
I was constantly doing things, but I didn't want to. That's not the career path I wanted. So at one point I thought I really just want to be an artist. I don't want to sort of be have this sort of this freelance kind of trajectory, which is fine, but it was like I kind of had a different idea of how I wanted my career or my development to go.
When is this in your life? Are you out? You're out of Terrence's band.
Oh yeah, so chronologically speaking, I guess I guess I stopped playing with Terrence when I was like maybe 20, 26 or so, and then I started playing the soprano. I guess maybe like around 28, something like that, 28, 29. And then yeah, so by the time I was 30, I guess that's when I sort of made that kind of declaration that okay, this is what I'm gonna do. This is sort of
Mm.
like my path. So then I did that for a while, and then I did the group thing for a while with the group I had called Global Unity
Mm-hmm.
and some other projects, and then after that kind of ran its course, it was it was around 38 or 39 that I kind of was felt like okay, I really want to narrow the scope more, just really focus more on like artistic things and things that aren't necessarily geared around working, but really just I always say artists because I'm actually thinking about visual artists. I
Mm.
always envied because I wasn't that good of friends with these people, but I would sometimes come across visual artists and they would invite me to their studios in Brooklyn, and I was always envious of how it was everything was there. It's just like they had their studio, the canvas, and their ideas, and they didn't need anybody else. And I felt like I always wanted that. I always wanted to have sort of this vision where it just all I had to do was kind of research the you might say the materials that I needed and sort of and have a workspace to develop it. And then after it was developed, I would then record it. So that was sort of
Mm.
how I was thinking. I was really thinking like a visual artist, just sort of working sort of in solitude. And so that's how the whole extended techniques in in buying different books came about because of there was a lot of stuff, but I noticed I used to use the Saxophone journal as a resource a lot of times. So I would find these dissertations online. So there would be, you know, saxophonists who would go into it in a very geeky way. As
Mm-hmm.
when you're writing your dissertations, a lot of times you take this sort of very narrow sort of idea and you just go very deep into it. So there would be these various dissertations on multi-phonics specifically. Some of it, you kind of have to sift through it. But what I learned, I started to see the logic of it with the fingerings and just how to think about it in different ways. And so I was able to sort of take those things and sort of try to apply them to standards and sort of my own vocabulary. And so I worked with that for a while. And then there were some standard books that were out there already, like Hello, Mr. Sax, I think was a big one.
Londex? Is that a
Yeah.
Londex? Yeah.
And then there was a great one called, I can't remember the name of it specifically, but it's by Ronald L. Caravan. He
Oh,
was, I think, a clarinet and saxophone teacher at Eastman.
right.
So, great book. So, that
And I didn't know it's a multiphonic book or extended technique book.
mostly extended techniques. It's
Okay.
like because it was multiphonics, quarter tone fingerings,
Oh,
and tonal distortion.
cool.
So it's like
Wow.
those three things, and he put them all in etudes. So that was really cool because then I could really see how to apply it to improvisation.
Mm.
So that book was very
Wow.
instrumental, I think, in my development.
You you really have control over the pitches that are being like I can feel like oh he's that's a little chord happening there. Do you need to think about it like oh that's a third like that's going to get me a B flat and a D let's say or that's or or are you working? Do you have to have it kind of worked out and planned?
Well, I usually have a fundamental tone that I reference, and then from the fundamental tone, you might say evolves the multiphonic. So I'm not thinking that much about the multiphonic in terms of chords. I mean, a little bit. I mean, it's really just how, like, which notes are serving my purpose. And I think it's best, like, if I play it, if I
Yeah,
can.
yeah, please.
So a lot of times when I'm playing multiphonics, I'm really thinking about the fundamental tone. Like, for example, let's say I play a G, regular G
Hmm.
with the um with the octave key. And I guess lowering the tongue, I'm able to get a multiphonic just from that. So if I'm improvising, I'm not necessarily thinking about the other notes, but I know if I land on the G, like, I know that I can sort of expand, so you might say,
Yeah.
the tones that are associated with that note.
Well, the reason I ask about specifically the other notes is because I hear you do it on like monk tunes,
Mm-hmm.
and I hear like, oh, that he's playing the pitches in a chord on some of
Yeah,
these notes,
yeah.
and I'm wondering, does he have all that mapped out in his brain, like kind of like a second nature kind of thing? You just know like, oh, this is a B flat, or this is B flat major, or this is, or do you kind of work that out?
Yeah, well, I guess at one point, I mean, I worked out, like, let's say, for example, let's say this multiphonic where I'm playing the G key, the sort of like the high G, I guess, with the F key and C key pressed.
Hmm.
So I can kind of hear almost sonically, like, there's a C sharp, like that note is there, like that's the dominant tone. But if I put it in the context of a tune, sometimes the weaker partials can kind of fill in sort of that melodic space. Like, for example, I was working on this the other day with uh, epistrophe. So, like, the first part, so by playing that multiphonic, like that C sharp
Yeah.
sort of fills in that gap, because you're waiting to hear it, and so it's there. You don't necessarily I didn't necessarily hear it when I played it without that tune,
Mm.
playing that tune, but when I play it in the context of the tune, I can hear the other sort of the
Yeah.
weaker partials. The weaker partials become dominant. It's almost like you want to hear it, and it's there. The ear finds it.
Mm. It's like as jazz moves forward in time and what we think of as classical music, especially classical saxophone, moves forward in time, they're just like, it's like no difference sometimes. I
Yeah.
think, do you think that there's like are you aware of that, or do you think that there's an overlap in
Yeah.
stylistic approaches?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel when I first started doing at least like solo concerts and just even trying to develop the concept, I feel like I was inspired more by classical saxophonists, or just that world in general, because they seem to embrace the kinds of things I was looking to incorporate more
Mm.
so than the jazz folks. The jazz folks that I knew anyway, was all about a certain type of vocabulary. It's sort of like the standard vocabulary, but the classical saxophonists were into sort of the textures and sort of even sort of taking it out of the concept of just noise, but actually using it in a very codified way because they have to, put it into their compositions. So I was very much inspired by this classical saxophone just as a concept. I think what I've done is sort of I've taken sort of something that was popular in that classical saxophone world, and integrated it more into the jazz world. So
I
I
agree.
took what they were doing, with these sort of 20th century compositions, and I was just sort of applying that same concept to monk tunes.
Yeah,
You know.
it's a great idea. Where does inspiration come from for you, besides what you've already mentioned?
Well, I think it comes from just uh, being inspired by people who are thinking differently.
Mm.
So that in itself sort of, I think it gives me the inspiration to sort of follow my own musical instincts. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a saxophonist or a visual artist. Could be a dancer. Could be a writer. Like I'm very much inspired by this quote by Toni Morrison when she said that if there's a book that you want to read and it has not been written, then you must write it.
That's good.
So I think about that all the time. So I mean, that has been sort of the impetus of a lot of the stuff that I do because even the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 records solo records I've made, a lot of it was born out of the idea that there's something I wanted to hear and I couldn't find it. So I just created it. For example, that album I recorded or CD I recorded, Soprano Bill. So with that, it's some extended techniques, but it's a lot of me preparing the saxophone. And so that came about because I wanted to hear it. I was just thinking there must be somebody who recorded a record of, improvised music, preparing the saxophone. And I couldn't, and it maybe existed, but I couldn't find anything.
That's the one with I can't remember the titles, but the one is all key clicked,
Yeah, yeah,
and then
yeah.
I gotta tell you it was deeply moving to
Oh,
hear
thanks.
that. Great.
Yeah,
I can't
thanks.
get enough of it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so that type of, you know, ideas, or at least just wanting to hear something and it not being able to find it, sort of inspires me to create it myself. In some ways, it's almost kind of entrepreneurial in a way, in that, like sometimes with the entrepreneurs, like there's a business that they feel they want to have in a neighborhood, and like, well, there are no great no coffee shops in this area. I need to open up one.
And what are the Me Measles?
Oh. I guess the idea came from I guess Sheila Jordan came to LIU to give a clinic once, and she was just talking about at one point in her life, she stopped worrying about the business in the sense of, worrying, as far as like what can the business do for her, what can she get out of it. She started thinking about what can she do for the business, like what can she give back. So that always stuck with me, and so over the years, I've thought about just how when, I've been the most frustrated is when I was always expecting more from the industry. And it could, whatever, it could release a recording. It's like, oh man, well, how come Downbeat's not reviewing my record? It's like all of this type of stuff. Oh, why didn't the critics pick me? Or why is the festival not booking me on this stuff? You started getting to this
Yeah.
whole me thing. So I found I had more satisfaction. I guess I think of it as being more spiritually satiating, when I'm, not focused on just sort of taking, but just sort of giving stuff back. So some of that, I guess my blog sort of stemmed from that because I wasn't really asking for anything. It was just like, oh, have an idea, check this out. You kind of put it out into the world. And then that's, even today, I'm still doing that in the sense of posting stuff on Instagram. Because I post stuff and it's not because I feel I'm great or anything, but it's like I'll come up with an idea, but like, wow, this is cool. Let me share it, because I almost feel like it would be kind of a waste if I come up with something that I think is cool and no one else gets to hear it but me. But now that we live in an age where there are platforms for you to share ideas. So I'm constantly just in a mindset where I'm always about sharing and just sort of giving. And I do get stuff back, but I'm not doing it for that reason. I don't post a video and think, oh man, this should get me a spot on a festival. If I did, I would be very frustrated. But if I put it out and then the response is, hey, that's cool, I think I'm going to try something like that. I've had that happen where I would post something, then someone would get inspired and they would post something that inspired them. And then I'm like, oh, wow, that's cool, I should try that. And then there could be sort of this back and forth. And so out of that comes musical growth. I nurture relationships, and sometimes it leads to gigs, which can lead to, sort of financial compensation. It's all sort of, it all ends up in a similar place, but I guess you might say your intent is different.
Um,
I wish I could say I'm so enlightened, but I think being enlightened I think it's a practice. I mean, I always feel I probably shouldn't even speak badly about them, but sometimes I feel with when you think about the Buddhist monks or whatever, it's like they're thinking, oh, I'm so enlightened, I'm sitting on top of a mountain and at peace. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's easy to do if you're sitting on a mountain by yourself, but come to New York City and have
yeah,
somebody step on your
yeah,
foot
yeah, right.
or get an attitude with you, whatever,
Yeah.
and see how that works out. But I always feel like, as far as just trying to become enlightened, I think it's a practice. It's like you have to, you fall off, then you get back on, and then it's like maybe you're falling off less, and then maybe the path to getting back on track becomes easier. Then the next thing you know, you're falling off fewer times, and then you're kind of there most of the time. And then you still fall off sometimes, but it doesn't really break your flow as much. You know what I mean? It's like I think we make a mistake when we feel we go from uh unenlightened to enlightened. I don't think it works that way. I think it's almost sort of like a spiritual muscle that you have to build over time. So yeah, you fall off, but then you get back on and you just sort of stay on track. But I still go through that, like you get frustrated, but then when that happens, I share. That I mean, I'll write a blog post, or I'll post something on Instagram or whatever, on Twitter. And that gives me a certain satisfaction. Like it'll fill that void. Almost like using a food analogy. It's like sometimes with you know, I think when you're sort of asking for, the industry to uh, to satisfy your needs, it's almost like eating carbs. I was just like carbs, aren't necessarily that filling, or if they are, it goes away very quickly, become hungry again. Where if you eat something that's more satiating, like, that's fatty, like salmon or something like that, you're kind of full, and it holds you for a while. So I think for me, giving is more in that area, where it's sort of like asking to receive. Like that's sort of like, eating carbs in a way that it kind of goes into your system, and then it kind of dissipates. You burn it off very quickly.
Interesting.
You know, it's like spiritually you go through it very quickly, then you need more.
Yeah. So yeah, can you
Yeah,
speak
yeah,
about having a small concentrated audience?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the biggest problem that we have, or at least what creates a lot of frustration, is that we focus more on just getting more, just like more and more and more and more and more, rather than figuring out, well, how can I better serve the people who are already in my corner, rather than trying to figure out, like how to get more people into your corner. Because it's something like a lot of times I think about like like the university that I teach at. It's so weird. Like they'll spend all of this effort on recruitment, and as soon as the students are there, they're like, okay, we need to get more. It's like, and the students there, it's like, oh, but we have needs, and it's just like, well, we don't have time for your needs. We have to get more students, you
Mm.
know. So it's sort of like that same concept where I feel like they would be more successful if they focus on, once the students are there, like really serving them. Because what happens is, like, when they're when you give them a great experience, it's like they're gonna tell their friends, and then their recruitment effort will actually keep working for them. It's like they don't have to keep starting over all the time from ground zero. It's like they can actually get more, from the efforts earlier. But I guess as far as the small audience, I think when you try to cast a wide net, I just think you end up spreading yourself too thin, you know, creatively. And as I said, it's like you don't really connect, with people in a in an intimate way, the way you would, if there were just a few people. And I sometimes use the analogy of, like how I've noticed, like, I play differently, and if I'm in a small room versus playing in a big concert hall. Like when I'm playing in a big concert hall, it's like I'm thinking in a more grandiose way, because you want to try to, you know, reach the people in the balconies and
Is that called
people.
playing for the house?
Yeah, exactly. Playing for the house, or you're going for a house.
Yeah, going for the house. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But when if it's a small place like Barbez or one of those venues, it's I'm more relaxed, and I don't feel I have to try as hard. And by me not forcing it, I think the music flows better, and it ends up sounding better. It's like
Mm.
most of my live recordings that I like are usually in much smaller venues rather than sort of like the bigger concert
Yeah,
halls.
right. You've been, I guess the question would be, how have you been able to be successful with bringing people in to challenging music?
Well, I mean, I always feel like I want people to get it. Like I've never been one of those people that, you know, if someone says, "Hey, I don't understand," I've never taken the position of, well, then you need to do more research and go figure out, and as a teacher, I'm used to reaching people who don't understand, or trying to figure out a way to make them understand. So I think musically, I think some of that has, filtered into how I create it, because, I don't think I'm watering down anything, but it's like there's a way of just sort of getting to the core of it, where it doesn't have to have all of this complexity. Like if you look at the blues, for example, it's like the way it's presented is like a very simplistic thing. It's just like, oh, it's just the blues. But if you sort of break it down, it's kind of complicated, because you have sort of the minor pentatonic, and then you might think of it, well, then there's the dominant chord with the sort of the flat nine, and then the sharp 11, and then you can think, oh wow, then there's you're going from major to dominant, so then you might think, well, there's a type of modal interchange. It's like there's a lot going on in there, but the way it's just presented is the blues. So I sort of, when I'm creating these uh, pieces or when I'm improvising using extended techniques, it's like, you don't need to know anything about music to get it. It's just like, well, it's kind of cool to look at. There's there's a melodic content sometimes, depending on what I'm doing. There's some type of groove ostinato that you can tap your foot to or snap your fingers to, or sometimes it's just like, oh wow, he's doing something that's very abstract. But I oftentimes don't do it very long, not because I don't want to lose them, because I myself get bored from doing it. I admire people who can do it. I mean, I've heard records where the first set is just like just total chaos, and they're just screaming, just you know notes, all over the place and honking and squeaking, and then the second set is it's the same thing for 30 minutes. Like, I can't play that way. It's not natural for me. So, and I think I attribute it just to my more straight ahead training, in that I sort of grew up trying to swing, play melodies, you know, play flowing lines. So all of these things, I think, are very accessible, to the listener. So I think I've just, you know, I just putting all of that stuff into a medium or format that's normally, you know, known for abstraction, or even just in some ways alienating the listener. And I think I just sort of, it makes it more accessible. And I think it brings a certain warmth to it. One of the reasons I even started to integrate more jazz into my solo concerts is just I felt like, well, it's a part of my experience. It's like I'm not Evan Parker. Like, he had a very different path, so I can't just, for me to get on stage and just circular breathe for 20 or 30 minutes, like, that's, I'm not giving the listener the full scope of my artistic experience. Where for him, maybe he that does satisfy, I guess, sort of what he wants to offer artistically. But for me, it's like, you know, playing over tunes, playing some traditional, jazz vocabulary, doing some extended techniques, preparing the instrument, like all of that is sort of like the full gamut of sort of like what I've studied and what I know, and what I have to offer.
Mm. I could I ask you to play something
Oh
for?
yeah, sure. Well, I guess whenever I play um, in a solo context more recently, like, I don't really have any particular tunes that I'm necessarily think about. I've had tunes that I have practiced and I may or may not go into, but I don't. I found that it always seems to go better when I don't have an agenda.
I like that. Yeah. Before you do play, can you just tell us what horn you're playing, and what your
Yeah,
setup
this
is?
yeah this is actually Roberto's Wind. So
Oh,
this is the RW
oh, all right.
soprano. So so RW soprano, Van Doren mouthpiece, Van Doren reed,
Hmm.
and I mean Van Doren ligature. I normally play a Van Doren reed, but I'm playing a Rico today only because the reeds I had were a little hard.
Mm.
So these they're not perfect, but at least they vibrate. What I'll do, I'll just play for, I don't know, maybe kind of 5 minutes or so, and I kind of sort of go through maybe how I transition oftentimes when I'm doing a performance, sort of like a sort of a mini version of it.
Okay. was
Oh,
beautiful.
something like that.
Thanks for that.
I guess the more I do it, I just try to remember that there's no such thing as sort of a wrong note. There's really just sort of a wrong reaction to
Mm,
it.
mm,
Because, I mean, once you start getting into extend techniques and that type of stuff, things don't always go like you intended for them to go. So you have to just go with it. It's like sometimes even when I'm putting like these things on, it's like it just doesn't. It's not always going the way it should. So I'm kind of making
mhm.
adjustments, and so rather than stop and think, oh man, this is not working right. Hold on, I need to do this. You make it a part of it. It's like sort of the it not working the way it's supposed to. You sort of make that a part of the composition. It's like that moment sort of becomes real or intentional.
Mm. What was the inspiration? How did you think up to do that?
Well, I guess with this, there's a I can't even. There's another. There's actually I think a classical composer who I think he wrote something for. I guess he called it Hookah sax.
Oh, okay.
I need to start memorizing people's name. But anyway, I think it was written for tenor maybe, and
Okay.
it's a similar setup. I think the difference is it certainly looks much different from this, but it's the same concept of sort of using some type of plastic tubing that the air has to travel through that lowers the sound. And of course, you have limited sort of notes as far as the range. So that whole idea I got from listening to his piece, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Interesting. I'd like to see if I can apply that to the soprano. And it just
Mhm.
so happens I went to Home Depot, and I didn't even bring my saxophone. I was just kind of looking at it, kind of going like this. And I said, oh, so I think this will fit on the neck. Then I figured, well, I need a way to put something to attach the mouthpiece to. So next to it was another set of tubes
Ah.
that a coil, and I bought that, and it fit perfectly. And then I
Ah.
had Roberto, who's my repair person, put a cork here, so that it could hold the mouthpiece in place. And it worked. And so I just been trying out uh, different sounds, and I still am experimenting, like and it can be drastically different. So I mean, so you can hear, and I go through my periods where I like different ones. So like this one gets this type of sound. Like various kind of multi-phonics that are interesting. And then sort of the opposite end of the spectrum is this. It's the shorter one. It's probably as short as I can make it in order to get a sound, have it work. But then, it's a very different kind of sound.
Yeah.
So so I mean, in the context of a solo performance, I mean, or even nowadays when I'm playing with a rhythm section, I tend to do this type of thing more. As I get more comfortable with it, I'm learning how to, and I find players who have the sensitivity to be able to do this type of stuff with. I'm finding that I'm able to have it not be all separate, like it's not where I have this thing that I do when playing solo, and then there's sort of another bag that I go into when I'm playing with people. It's gradually becoming sort of one concept.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is, and I need to recoil this, but like this is pretty large, and
Yeah, I'm curious what that one's gonna do.
but and I find I have to play differently. I have to play more with this, which keeps it's good for the up and partials. Like it's
That's
so
really cool. So were you kind of getting playing
yeah,
like in
I guess
overtones?
yeah,
Is that?
I
I
guess
don't know.
the way I guess it's the same concept of like when you're playing multi-phonics, how you I guess the changing of the tongue position sort of causes the air to move differently, which sort of sets off certain partials. So it's
Mm-hmm.
the same concept, just sort of being put through this tubing.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the other day, I think like when I first came into the scene, like really the only way you could share your music or at least get your music into the public sphere was by making a recording, because you couldn't, you know, otherwise you couldn't get it on radio, and even in the beginning, like I don't even think listening stations were that popular at
Mm.
record stores. So if you had music or you had an idea, you kind of had to make a recording, and then it has to go through those whole channels just to sort of get out into the public. It's like you have to get a label, then you have to wait for them for it to come up when they're for their new releases, and then it gets into the stores, and then you know if it's a certain type of music, it can get on the radio. So there's this whole process you have to go through just to have an idea, realize it, and then share it with people. But now, it's almost immediate. It's like I don't necessarily have to to make a recording in order to share my ideas. It's like I can you know work on a piece and put it up on Instagram or YouTube or any of those social media platforms. And in some ways, it's like I kind of get just as much satisfaction because it's sort of coming from the same place. It's like you have an idea, you realize it, you share it with people, and then they share their reactions with you. So in some ways, I think I'm getting that side or that need satisfied or nurtured. So it makes me less compelled to feel like I need to record
Do you
because
think you're not gonna do any more recordings?
I'm sure I will.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure I will because there's been even though I'm always focusing, I'm always uploading stuff. I've been thinking about. I guess Monk Abstractions was my very first solo recording, so I've been working on some other Monk tunes. So I've been thinking about doing another Monk Abstractions like the first one, only integrating all of this. So it's
Ah.
just like I guess the sonic gamut is just really widened.
Mhm.
So just like really pushing it, just like having and it may be. I mean, it will be sort of like a culmination of all of the things I've been working on, because I guess I started off simply just uh, recording, you might say, I don't know, a single horn, and then I sort of got into multi-tracking and sort of
That's
having
right. Yeah.
layered saxophones. So maybe, and I Monk Abstractions record where it's like everything I've been doing for the past 15 to 20 years sort of coming together, sort of under under Monk, So I've been toying with that concept. But oddly enough, I've been actually focusing on writing. I may have mentioned that I was getting into fiction writing.
Yeah.
So I actually wrote a series of short stories that are all based around jazz musicians in music in general.
Fictitious jazz musicians or
Yeah,
real?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess one of the things I learned from fiction writing, I always say you want to try to put as much as yourself
Oh,
in
okay.
your own experiences. So these are all fictitious characters, but I guess they're kind of composite characters of just people that I've met for the past 30, 40 years or
Man.
so. And so, you know, I can't remember how many stories are, but it's quite a few. I mean, it's edited and ready to go, but I might do another pass of editing and just to get some other people sort of giving me some pointers. And
Okay.
then it's like, so I've been toying with releasing that in the fall. There's not a lot done in a contemporary way and done with a certain authenticity where jazz musicians can actually read fiction, based on people that they on characters that they come across, or people speaking, someone speaking about it in a way that sounds authentic. A lot of times when people, non-musicians, write and talk about music, it starts to sound a little bit corny.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, for sure.
I think people will appreciate it. So I'm very excited just to see how that
Yeah, I can't
goes
wait.
over. So that's one thing. And then, I have other, like, projects that I'm recording with other people. And so yeah, things are, coming out. I mean, people can always just go to somenewmusic.com, and I'll be posting more on my blog, soprano sax talk.blogspot.com. So that'll,
Yeah.
I usually try to stay up to date with the things that I'm doing. But it's I'm always doing something. Like there's always something brewing.
I got two open-ended. What sustains you artistically?
Well, I think just being excited about what I'm doing, and being excited to share it. Like to me,
Mm.
that's the thing that makes me like happy. Like to have an idea that I'm excited to wake up to delve further into. It's sort of like when we first started playing. It's like, you've kind of figured out maybe how to play over chord changes or whatever. You discovered the blues scale, and it's like you can't wait to wake up the next morning to try it out again. And it's like that same, childlike excitement. So I'm always trying to maintain that. And that's probably why I do different things. Like that's probably why I got into fiction writing, because the same type of thing where it's like a new obsession that I'm excited about, that's creative, and it makes me come back to music more fresh, because I start to see the parallels and the commonalities, and be like, oh wow, I can, this is what they're doing in the literary world. Let me see if I can see if I can apply that to music. So it's always, it's giving me a new perspective, and it's always also giving me a perspective of sort of how art is manifesting itself in other idioms.
Mm. But would you
Oh,
could we improvise a little
oh,
bit together?
I would love that. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
cool.
that was fun, Sam. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank
Thanks.
you. Yeah, I had a
this
good
is.
time.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. That was super fun. Thank you again for dropping by. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Be well.